Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of 15 Minutes with Dr. Makis, my new hard-hitting medical podcast. This episode is about fenbendazole and cancer. I will give you the most comprehensive review of the use of fenbendazole in cancer there is. Fenbendazole is an antiparasitic. It is a dog dewormer, has been used as an antiparasitic since the 1960s. And it has been shown to have extensive anti-cancer activity. Now, it's not FDA approved for use in humans. There is a version of it that is almost identical that is approved for use in humans by the FDA, and it's called mebendazole. I will do a separate video for mebendazole because the dosing is quite different. Now, the story of fenbendazole in cancer really starts with Joe Tippens, an Oklahoma man who was diagnosed with stage 4 small cell lung cancer, who was sent home to die by his oncologist with less than 1% chance of survival. And he stumbled across fenbendazole as a recommendation by a veterinary friend of his, and he used it with a few other things, and he cured his stage 4 small cell lung cancer. So here's a quick video clip describing how he cured his cancer.
When you tell someone that a medicine for dogs cured your cancer, you better be ready for some skeptics. But Joe Tippens says it did save his life and others. And now even cancer researchers are open to the possibility it might be true.
My neck, my liver, my pancreas, my bladder, in my bones, it was everywhere.
2 years ago, Joe Tippens says he was told to go home, call hospice, and say his goodbyes. The doctors were unanimous. He was going to die of small cell lung cancer.
Once that kind of cancer goes that far afield, the odds of survival are less than 1%, and the median life expectancy is 3 months.
Tippens says he went from 220 pounds to 110, but that was January of 2017. Today, Tippens is very much alive, and what he credits for his survival has doctors scratching their heads and the rest of us raising eyebrows.
About half the people think I'm just crazy, and half the people want to know more and dig deeper.
Tippens says he got a tip, not from a pharmacist, but a veterinarian. And in his desperation, he turned from people medicine to dog medicine, specifically fenbendazole, or what you give a dog when it has worms.
Truth is stranger than fiction, you know.
Just 3 months later, Tippens says his cancer was gone.
I'm usually skeptical, and I was, and maybe still am, about this one. But there's an interesting background to this.
Cancer researchers like Stephen Prescott are skeptical, but they also are not dismissing this anti-parasitic's potential. He says Tippens is not the first person to potentially benefit, and maybe not the last.
Scientists at many credible places have done work on this for years.
But was it the dog dewormer, or was it something else? Tippens took the dog medicine with daily vitamin E supplements and CBD oil. He was also taking an experimental cancer-fighting drug. But Tippens says out of the 1,100 patients on that clinical trial, he was the only one cleared of cancer. Tippens says he was saved by the dog dewormer, and he plans to take it for the rest of his life.
Well, my insurance company spent $1.2 million on me with traditional means before I switched to a $5 a week medicine that actually saved me.
Prescott says he's now working with Tippens to organize a case study.
We're going to do it and see if we can confirm that in a very rigorous or a clinical study sort of way that these patients had that kind of response.
As for Tippens,
I've got now over 40 success stories other than me.
He's sharing his story on an online blog that has already been read more than 100,000 times. Most of the feedback positive or curious. Some, though, accuse Tippens of giving cancer patients false hope.
How do I answer that? I mean, if I've saved one other person other than me, it's worth it to me.
All we know for sure is that Joe Tippens is alive. In time, perhaps we'll also know if this medicine made for man's best friend might also be man's newest cancer cure.
Fascinating. You know, when you're in the fight for your life, you don't care what it is. If it works for you, it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And he says, listen, I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert. I cannot tell people to take this. I can't. He said, but it worked for me.
Now, I always like to look at peer-reviewed publications and see if there's actually any evidence of fenbendazole in treating cancer. What are the mechanisms of action? Has it been tried in humans? And so I'm going to go over a few key articles that I think are extremely crucial for understanding how fenbendazole works. This is a 2020 article by Deek Saw Sun that talks about the repurposing of benzimidazole drugs. Now, this is the family of drugs that fenbendazole belongs to for cancer. And it has a fascinating summary of fenbendazole. So let's just take a quick look at the structure of fenbendazole. And here is mebendazole, which is almost identical, except instead of a sulfur here, it's got an oxygen. So again, I'll do a separate video for mebendazole, which is FDA approved. It's much more expensive. Their anti-cancer mechanisms seem to be identical. Fenbendazole has approximately 12 anti-cancer mechanisms, and they are summarized at the end of this article. So you've got your typical apoptosis, autophagy, cell cycle arrest. So fenbendazole kills cancer cells through these mechanisms. It also interferes with cancer cell replication. So it's a microtubule destabilizer. It also inhibits cancer cell viability through mTOR and other signaling pathways. However, the very important anti-cancer activities of fenbendazole are the following. Glucose utilization of cancer cells. So fenbendazole actually prevents cancer cells from using glucose as an energy source. It interferes with glucose utilization. It also increases p53 levels. p53 is a tumor suppressor protein that is damaged in many cancers. And we know that Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 vaccines, the spike protein in the vaccine actually damages p53 in people who take the vaccines. So right here, you have something that really may help patients with turbo cancer who've developed cancer after COVID-19 vaccines. Another important anti-cancer mechanism is that it inhibits cancer stem cells. Cancer stem cells are responsible for metastases, and they're responsible for cancer recurrence. Another important thing that it shows in this article is that there are no clinical trials with fenbendazole. There are many clinical trials with mebendazole, however, which is the human-approved form that is much more expensive. Here's another study that talks about the anti-cancer effect of fenbendazole that I feel is extremely important and crucial, and that is the increase in expression of p53 tumor suppressor. So in this study by Park from 2022, which showed anti-cancer effects of fenbendazole on chemo-resistant colorectal cancer cells. So keep that in mind, colorectal cancer. We actually have evidence of increase in p53. So you get fenbendazole is presumed to activate p53-mediated apoptosis by increasing p53 expression. So you get increased expression of p53, which leads to cancer cell apoptosis, cancer cell death. So an extremely important mechanism. This is the protocol that Joe Tippens used to cure his stage 4 small cell lung cancer. Joe Tippens used fenbendazole from Merck called Panacur C. It was 222 milligrams of fenbendazole, and he took it 3 days on and then 4 days off. He also took vitamin E with it, 400 to 800 milligrams a day. He also took curcumin, 600 milligrams a day, and CBD oil, 25 milligrams a day. I will do videos on each of these separately, but the vitamin E is particularly important because I ran across something very interesting in my literature search. There's a study from 2008 that had looked at mice that had human lymphoma xenografts on them. And they had looked at supplementing the mouse diet with either vitamins or fenbendazole or a combination of fenbendazole and vitamins. And what they found was absolutely fascinating. They found that the diet with vitamins by itself or fenbendazole by itself actually didn't change tumor growth. However, when you combine the vitamins with the fenbendazole, they found significant inhibition of tumor growth. They didn't understand why, and they even say the mechanism for this synergy is unknown and deserves further investigation. What are the vitamins that they were giving the mice? Well, vitamins A, D3, the B complex, but they also gave vitamin E. So there seems to be evidence for synergy between fenbendazole and vitamin E, and both of those are in Joe Tippens's protocol. So if you're going to take fenbendazole, you may want to make sure that you are taking vitamin E with it. So which cancers respond to fenbendazole? Well, in my ivermectin video, I told you that lymphoma, there's not much evidence for ivermectin use in lymphoma. Well, there is with fenbendazole. So for example, in this 2023 study by Habin Jung, they tested mouse lymphoma cells and normal spleen cells, and they found that fenbendazole is very toxic to lymphoma cells, but not normal spleen cells. In this study from 2023 by Semkova, and you see these are very recent studies, this group found that fenbendazole had anti-cancer activity against triple-negative breast cancer cells. This is the most aggressive type of breast cancer. It is also the type of breast cancer that we're seeing as turbocancers in patients who've had COVID-19 mRNA vaccines. In this study by Liu and Ren from 2022, again, another recent study, showed that fenbendazole showed potent and dose-dependent inhibition of the proliferation of human glioblastoma cells. These are extremely aggressive brain cancers that are also showing up in COVID-vaccinated individuals. So again, activity against an extremely aggressive brain cancer. Has fenbendazole ever been used in humans and this been documented in the literature? Yes, there are 2 reports of fenbendazole use in humans. The first one was actually as an antiparasitic in this 1976 study by Brook, and they used 1 gram and 1.5 gram of fenbendazole, and it showed that it was effective in humans as an antiparasitic, but they used it as a single dose. Now, in this Japanese study from 2021, an 80-year-old Japanese woman was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, non-small cell lung cancer with brain metastases. She was on Keytruda, and she started taking fenbendazole on her own. Now, she took a very high dose. She took 1 grams per day for 3 days on, 4 days off. So this would be 5 times what Joe Tippens took. Joe Tippens took 222 milligrams a day, 3 days on, 4 days off. She took 1 gram a day. And she did it for about a month. Then she visited her doctors. Her doctors found that her liver function tests were elevated. And so then they told her to stop the fenbendazole, and then her liver function tests returned to normal. They also claimed that it didn't help her tumor at all. Now, what's interesting is that this group was already heavily biased. They talk about, social media information. And you could tell in this article that they were basically quite biased, and they attributed the liver function test entirely to the fenbendazole. So this is really the only recent report of the use of fenbendazole, someone who took it on their own. So I've put together this very important chart of dosing of fenbendazole that summarizes the knowledge that we have. Again, I don't recommend veterinary drugs, but this is what people are taking. People want to know what kind of dosing they should be looking at. And there are functional medicine doctors in the United States that are actually using fenbendazole, and they are using these types of doses. So I would consider a starting dose to be 222 milligrams a day, 6 days a week. And this would be the starting dose for most cancers. You want to take it with or after a meal. Now, this is based on Joe Tippens's initial protocol of 222 milligrams, 3 days on, 4 days off. It was then modified 6 days on, 1 day off. And I would honestly add the vitamin E because there is at least some evidence that there may be a synergistic effect where tumors shrink if you give it with vitamin D, as I showed in the earlier study. If you're dealing with aggressive cancers or you're a heavier person, you may want to bump that up to 444 milligrams a day, 6 days a week. You may want to check liver functions in every case anyways. Liver function tests are very easily done. That's blood work that your family doctor can do or your oncologist. And a very high dose would be 888 milligrams or 1 gram a day. This could be you could consider this in very dire situations. However, as I said, there was that one study with the Japanese woman who was 80 years old, who took 1 gram a day for a month and then found significantly elevated liver function tests. And so, this is something that you absolutely want to be doing liver function tests to make sure that you're not having any kind of liver toxicity. So that's it. It's very straightforward. People ask me about fenbendazole and ivermectin. Can they be used together? Does one replace the other? Because they're both antiparasitics. They're completely different drugs. You can use one, you can use the other, you could use a combination. It's really completely up to you. But they are completely different drugs. They're not interchangeable. Using fenbendazole is very simple, very straightforward. Joe Tippens pioneered this protocol of 222 milligrams a day as a starting dose. He combined it with vitamin E. I think that's actually very important. I think if you're going to take this, you probably should be combining it with vitamin D. There's evidence of a synergistic effect and a tumor shrinkage effect. He also combined it with curcumin, which has proven anti-cancer properties, and CBD oil, which has proven anti-cancer properties. I will do separate videos on those two as well. So there you have it. Very straightforward. Fenbendazole, starting dose 222 milligrams a day. You could bump it to 444 milligrams a day, 6 days on, 1 day off. Take it with vitamin E. Consider taking also curcumin and CBD oil. And if you're going to do something that's not FDA approved, there you have it. That's the information. I don't recommend veterinary drugs. If I was to make a suggestion or recommendation, look into mebendazole, which is the FDA approved human form. I will do a separate video on this. That'll be my next podcast video. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.